priorities are, but not taking that to the point where you can't shake hands with somebody or work with them on other issues. Because when I go to Congress, and it's when, I'm going to have to work with Republicans, and they're very hard to work with. But if we have trouble, it's not because I'm going to be causing the trouble. I'm going to be willing to work with people on the issues that we find shared ground on, at the same time as being totally committed to the things I'm totally committed to. I became interested in politics. My family wasn't that political, but in high school, I remember reading all these pages trying to understand the abortion debate, and ended up taking a Greyhound bus to Washington, D.C. To be part of the March for Women's Lives in 1987.
It was.
Was anybody else there?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you remember that?
I do.
Welcome.
Sorry.
No
problem.
And it was a wonderful moment for me because I paid it for myself. I always worked summers. I had to pay for college myself too. But to get on a Greyhound bus and then show up in Washington and see this sea of women coming together to speak up for a woman's right to have power over her own reproductive decisions, and woman after woman speaking at the podium. It wasn't all women, but as a teenage girl, that really mattered. You know, being able to see powerful women speak in different ways, that not all powerful women speak in the same way at all. I also was a huge, I loved as a girl, Jerry Ferraro, who seemed to be having...
I told Zephyr, doesn't she look like Jerry Ferraro? She reminds me of Jerry Ferraro.
But she was so funny and so lively, and just, it was so exciting to be able to see that. You know, she was a real inspiration, And I feel so grateful having grown up in the 70s and 80s during the Equal Rights Amendment movement, seeing this being played out, having debates, but it really, that idea, anything you can do, I can do, was really important for me as a girl. You know, this sense that it was possible to go into politics. It was possible to imagine being a businesswoman. You know, these really, really important. After college, I was a special ed teacher's aide in a small rural public school. Education has been important to me. Even before that, I went to a great public school myself. And really seeing how there's certain professions right now, like teaching and nursing, both of which dominated by women, both of which are increasingly sort of treated with suspicion. With the reporting requirements. I was talking to nurses, some nurses recently, and talking about how someone was saying, sometimes I have to leave my patient in his pool so I can go report about my patient being in his pool. But the reporting requirements are so high that they actually get in the way of care. And the same with teaching, is that, of course, you know, there's going to be testing in schools, but the testing shouldn't be getting in the way of teaching and be replacing teaching. In fact, you have to bring respect to these professions of care and learning, because respect is ultimately what's going to lead to great teachers and keeping great nurses in the profession. Certainly something I saw. After I got involved in politics, I've had lots of personal experiences that I'm sure other people have as well. But one thing that really struck me is that very often in political campaigns, whether they're local or national, and the more national, the worse it is, they're really dominated by men. In terms of the strategic decisions. And so a friend of mine and I did a study about 7 years ago of women in presidential campaigns and how much they were paid and what role they had. And it's really important because issues do impact women differently. And if campaigns are dominated with all the key staffers are often men, that's going to have an impact on the kinds of stories you hear and the kinds of stories that you think are important. So it's been very important to me. I hired the best campaign manager, who happens to be a woman. And it's exciting because there aren't that many congressional races, and my finance director is also a woman, and I have a policy director who's a man. We have a real mix, but it's important to me that there are women in the room while making strategy decisions, because policy impacts us in different ways. Over 80% of Congress members are men.
8-0.
8-0. So we have a problem about who's in the room. And I have a bunch of sort of policy ideas and particular proposals, but what I really want to do now is open it up for a discussion, and we're going to try to come away with, you brought some top 3, but there's 2 different things that I'm really looking for help from you. One is policy areas, issue areas that you think are really important to focus on. Because any successful candidate or member of Congress is going to have areas of focus, not try to do everything. So we have to narrow it down. The other thing is stories. Because so often, Carol, welcome.
How are you?
Carol might have a story that I haven't heard. I'll give you an example from another area that I care a lot about. I care a lot about local food in our local schools and in our local institutions. We have some of the best apple orchards in the world right here. Our apples from Ulster are now shipped to Texas to get sliced, put in little plastic bags, and then shipped back to Ulster to be served at McDonald's.
Yep.
We can be doing apple slicing here. That's the story I heard 10 days ago. But it's a way that illustrates something that I've been already talking about why we need local processing plants. You're going to have stories that illustrate the need for equal pay, the need for child care that I might not have heard. And so besides issues, you don't have to necessarily have the HR 258. Besides issues, stories that you hear. This is not just important for what I want to do in Congress. I'm running for Congress to bring people back into Congress. Because right now it's dominated by lobbyists and a few big companies. I'm running to raise up people's voices. It's a tough year, but it is also a historic year. And because there's so much moving around, it's all the more important to come in with bringing people's voices, bringing people's stories. But it's also important because to win this district, women, Republican women, independent women, as well as Democratic women are absolutely critical. And the beating heart of this district is independence. Most people think of themselves as independent. You laugh? I do. I appreciate that. I have an independent streak myself, as you may have noticed from my last political choice. And I don't take that as a matter of, this is what my mother and father taught me, is you can be polite, but just stand up for what you care about. And actually, the more polite you are, the more you can get away with.
Or you get more reserved than you can.
Yeah.
You don't have to.
You have to.
Be sweet.
Yeah.
If you don't like to.
But in this district, there is a big swath of independent women, some of whom are registered Democratic, some of whom are registered Republican, some of whom are registered independent, some of whom are unaffiliated, who will decide this election. So this is important for policy, and it's important for politics. So I'd love to sort of open the floor. We were going to break up into smaller groups, but I think this is a small enough group. For if you can just take a minute and think of, we'll start with issues, but then if you think of a story, I want to, just 2 issues that you think impact women differently and are really important for women's economic health and well-being. And for the people who just came in, you want to introduce yourselves too?
I'm Cindy. I'm Carol.
Okay. You guys live
And
here?
I'm Joan. Yes.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah,
Hi,
I live
Joan.
right here. You live right away.
Okay. Great.
That's terrific.
Great. So.
Well, I want to make sure that I get these,
Great.
drinks that I sent and bringing to it. And Carl, go.
And so there's one other woman here.
Hi.
Listening intently. Christine, who's from Milan, sent me what I thought was just on an outstanding list of issues, which is, you know, there are three: reproductive security, which means sex education, birth control, abortion services if needed; physical security, which means, you know, dealing with the issues of violence, guns, and health insurance; and then economic security, which means childcare and jobs. And I think, oh my God, this is
Yes.
this is perfect. I'm not so sure that I could have ever, you know, made that, you know, list any better, but I was really.
Well, thank you for that. One thing I'd also like to hear is projects that you know that are already happening that are really successful, like existing programs or communities that are, whether it's safe houses or other projects that are addressing some of these issues. Certainly with domestic violence, you know, I'd love to. It's an area that we want to be strong on, and I'd love to hear about, you know, who's doing great work, so we can go visit and talk to people.
Well, I'm just going to pick one here because, you know, having been in the Dutchess County Legislature, the Republican senator from this district got money for domestic abuse, you know, issues, and then it was basically provided to Poughkeepsie, Hyde Park, anything that was along the Route 9 corridor, and the rest of this county got nada.
Yeah,
It's the same thing that happens,
issue.
you know, with, you know, with in the court issues. There were, you know, public defenders who were allocated, you know, to Poughkeepsie, Hyde Park, Route 9 corridor, and the rest of Eastern Dutchess get, you know, almost nothing. That seems to be what happens in this county. And, you know, I understand why they were saying, well, Poughkeepsie's, you know, looking, but the domestic abuse is everywhere.
Yes.
You know, it happens. So why doesn't this area rate, the services that are being provided?
I have an issue. My child was a victim of a sex crime, and he couldn't get any help here. There was nothing. I had to send him to Poughkeepsie every day because there was no.
Poughkeepsie was the closest.
That was the closest. Yep.
And did you have transportation? Because there's no public transportation.
No.
Yeah.
The county does not provide any public transportation.
No. And I couldn't even use Medicaid because it wasn't listed as a doctor, but yet the person that was involved with her, you know, the crime victims, they were wonderful. The troopers and the state police, they were excellent.
Yeah.
But, you know, they were required. I had to take her every day for 2 weeks. The closest place was Poughkeepsie. I mean, it was beautiful. The county pays for the victims' crime unit, the therapist, but there's nothing.
And how did you do that
here.
with your job, or did you?
I didn't work at the time, nor can I work right now. And we scrimp and take her. I took her for 2 weeks straight. I had to.
Yeah.
But there's nothing. There's no kind of, you know, even like the Grace Smith House. You know, they didn't have anything for that. And the closest was Poughkeepsie. There's no like satellites out here.
Yeah.
There's no like there's no transportation. There's no rate counseling up here. There's nothing. There is absolutely nothing. If you have to go to Poughkeepsie or then you have to go across the river. Of course, I have Medicaid.
Yeah.
Can't cross lines. I can't go to Connecticut.
Yeah.
Because of the Medicaid issues. So I had to stay. But I had a driver every day for weeks.
Wow.
For weeks, yeah. Because there is nothing, and everybody's like, this one lady, she was really sweet. She's like, you know, you need to advocate for out there. And I'm like, you know, I said there's a beautiful building, like the Pine Plains Library, that has that beautiful community room. If somebody would come up, like once a week, once a month.
Yeah.
There's got to be other people in this area that don't need somebody to talk to. You know, that's, you know, in this certain line of. You know, there's special, you just can't take her to a psychiatrist. It has to be a special person, and there was nothing. I mean, I searched on the line for weeks saying, I can't drive her every day. She would miss half of her school because it was a 2-hour session.
Oh.
So she was missing school on top of it.
Yeah.
But there was nothing.
This is not atypical of a rural community.
Yeah.
Right?
This part of the reason I'm asking what's existing.
They get poor, you know, funding for schools, but that, you know, we're talking about state issues here. I'm sorry, and I'm saying, and I hate to like, you know, Well, you know,
But it's a rural
Yeah.
crisis across the country.
Right,
though.
right,
It's
right.
true that it's a state issue.
Right.
And thank you for your advocacy. But it's also true across the country.
Right.
That rural communities are getting left behind. And you see the effect of inequality. If you look at a map
Right.
of whose salaries are lower.
Right. Yeah.
But, wow.
And this lady said, "Oh, where do you live?" And I'm like, "Pine Place." She goes, "Oh, things like that happen up there." I'm like, "Yeah, why wouldn't they happen up there? They happen here, they happen there. You know, it doesn't matter. You don't have to live in a city
there's
for
no
something like that.
geographical
Right.
borders.
But there is, you know, I think it's everywhere. Rural
Yeah.
communities, they need to like start grouping together and having other, you know, things like that. You know,
And in that sense, it isn't just a state issue. It really is a national issue. I mean,
you know what I mean?
Congress
It's-
could do a
you
lot
know,
better.
Between that and the issue of drugs in this area,
Yes, yes.
it's outrageous, and that is maybe a state issue. It's still a local issue here. It's horrible. You know, there's nothing out here.